Let's go ahead and get started. We've got three amazing presenters on the call today. The first, Jess Von Bank. Jess is the VP of Market Engagement with Symphony Talent. And then we have two presenters from Northwell Health, Mike Kern and Jess Schuster. Mike is the Director of Employee Experience at Northwell, and Jess is a Candidate Engagement and Experience Innovator. Jess, I'm going to pass it over to you, and we're going to kick things off. Welcome.
Thank you, Ryan. I am so excited. It's been such fun getting to know Mike and Jess and the Northwell Health story over the months, but especially in the last couple of weeks as we've been preparing for this webinar. I think that everybody's going to get a lot out of this, and generally speaking, what we're talking about today is the three promises that Northwell Health delivers upon, and we're going to get to that in a little bit, but a big way, as we all know, anybody who's responsible for brand and culture and employee engagement, everybody knows that a big way on how you deliver on your brand promise is really activating your employer value proposition, but both internally and externally. It's really important to unify the candidate promise that you make with the actual employee experience. And Northwell Health took that on, as many companies do, but also on the back of a new brand. So talk about an added challenge. So you had your work cut out for you guys. I'm really excited to dig into this story with Mike and Jess today. That's what we're talking about. And before we get into that, I think it's important to understand those promises, what we just talked about, and get to know Northwell Health a little bit. So we've got a little video, which is really, really great, and I'd love to start with that, and then we can get into things.
From the smallest gesture to life-changing treatment and research,
we always act with intent, with heart, and with passion.
To make people's lives the best possible.
It's not a normal 9 to 5.
We're flexible,
hardworking,
and not afraid to push the boundaries.
To go the extra mile for our colleagues, our patients, and their families.
We are true to our beliefs and our quest to define the healthcare industry of tomorrow.
Caring runs through everything we do.
It's who we are.
Northwell Health was not made for just anyone.
Here, we aren't satisfied with settling.
So we search for innovation in everything we do.
We are the explorers made for extraordinary discoveries.
The pioneers made for breaking with convention.
And the team players made for unwavering support.
It's not for the faint-hearted.
It doesn't just take courage and determination to do what we do.
It's that spark and instinct to care that changes lives.
We want you to spread your wings, grab unbelievable opportunities,
and fulfill that desire to make things better.
We are made for Northwell Health.
Made for caring and protecting our patients and communities.
Made for leading innovation and change that inspires our colleagues.
And turns tomorrow into a breathtaking opportunity.
We are Northwell Health.
And we're made for this.
Jess and Mike, I love that video. It says so much about Northwell Health and your culture and your passion and the promises that you've made. So let's talk a little bit about the journey that you're on. And Ryan, we can get to the first slide. The promises that you deliver upon, and this is really important from an activation of your EVP standpoint, the promises you make are to your employees, to your customers, but to your patients as well. So we've gotten a taste of your culture and your mission and your employer value proposition. Tell me a little bit about the journey you've been on. I think, most people don't realize Northwell Health is the largest private employer in the state of New York. And again, this is a new brand. You just launched this EVP this past spring. So where did you start? And then how do you approach activation to serve dual purposes, both internal and external?
Sure. So let me start by just adding to what you said about us as an organization. We have 63,000 employees currently, 22 hospitals, 550 ambulatory sites roughly, and growing regularly. And we hire around 150, 200 people each week into the organization, just so you can get a perspective. And we're a full-service healthcare organization, all the way from beginning of life to end of life as well. And so I guess our whole journey around our promises started way back in 2014. Our first promise in our organization came about, which is our culture of care. And that is really an initiative around our promise to our patients and their families about how we're going to treat them when they come for services at our various facilities and sites. And then last year, in 2016, in January, our brand changed and our brand promise emerged. And that's our externally facing promise, and that's our promise to our consumers and our communities about not only the services we provide, but also how we are going to improve the quality of health outside of our sites and our hospitals to improve health in the community. But there was a promise missing from those two promises, and that was our promise to each other, our promise to ourselves and to our 63,000 employees. And so starting last year, we began to build our EVP, which internally we call the employee promise. And the video you just saw was a video of our actual Northwell employees reciting the words to that promise. And that promise was built across 74 research sessions with 2,000 employees from our organization who represented various specialties and jobs. So physicians were involved in the process, nurses, administrators. We really tried to capture the voice of the employee. And in those research sessions, we asked them to be as honest as possible about what it's like to work at Northwell. We wanted to know about all the great things, but we also wanted to know about the challenges that they face here. So we asked them questions like, if you had a family member coming to work at Northwell, what would you tell them to prepare them for the experience? Or what do you say to your family when you sit down at the dinner table after work and they ask you how your day went? We really tried to capture those honest moments of good days and bad days. And throughout that process, we compiled all of their feedback, and we created actually 2 EVPs that we went back to those 2,000 folks and had them vote on. It was a dead tie, and so we trimmed out all of the fluff and unnecessary language between those 2 versions, and we combined it into the 3-paragraph promise that we have now, which is our EVP. We also call it our employee promise, and we say it was made by the people for the people. It's what you get for what you put in. So it's what Northwell Health expects of its employees and what you get in return for meeting those expectations. In addition to that, we have the tagline made for this, which we've trademarked for our organization. And that was created purposefully. One, it sounds nice. It rolls off your tongue, but really we created it so that it provokes the question, am I made for this? And we encourage all of our employees to ask themselves, am I made for working at Northwell Health? Because working here is not for everyone. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's not a typical 9-to-5 job. And we tell our employees open and honestly, it's okay if you say to yourself, I am not made for this. Then it becomes their job to figure out either how to change that or to look for another employer that they are made for working for.
And with that, from the candidate side, while our internal employees say, am I made for this? We ask our candidates, are you made for this? So we've just switched up the language a little bit. So as candidates are looking through the content that we put out and the information about our culture and our jobs, they have the ability to say, am I made for this? It kind of goes hand in hand and ties all together with the internal side. So once they come to the organization, they get to act on why they were hired and how they were made for working at Northwell Health. In addition to the launch of our EVP, we really engaged our internal staff in multiple activities. One of them, as you may or may not have seen at the end of the video, there's the this and the made for this looks like handwriting. That is actually somebody's handwriting. We put out a competition to our employees called Write This. And with that, we asked for submissions from across the organization about why our employees feel they are made for this. And who the winners became the EVP handwriting, or the Northwell Health Employee Promise handwriting. There are 2 versions internally, and there's one external version that Careers is actually using. So from the external standpoint, as a candidate, you'll see one version, and then once you come in, you'll still experience the same experience of Made for This, but you'll know that the writing of it is somebody's handwriting from within the organization.
And as part of that activation, we asked employees to handwrite a story about a good experience they had at Northwell. So we were capturing those stories as well as using them as a way to choose the winners for our 2 internal fonts. And those winners got a number of different prizes, but they also got to have lunch with our CEO and their immediate team as winners of those. We also did another. Oh, go ahead.
Love that story. I just love that story. Not only the fact that you asked employees for the feedback and the input, but the fact that you asked for them to give it to you in their handwriting, and you used their handwriting. I mean, how authentic can it possibly be? How natural can that possibly feel to not only hear from your employees, but to see it expressed in such a personal way? I just love that story so much.
We really wanted to capitalize on the fact that our EVP was made by the people for the people. So what better way than to get our people a voice with their handwriting as part of the EVP?
And we were concerned about getting submissions at all because we're geographically dispersed, right? So, but we got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of submissions. So it was a big hit across the health system. And believe it or not, there's an organization out there that their sole job is to turn people's handwriting into digital fonts. So we learned that as something new as well.
I love it. I love it. I love your mission about it. You're a healthcare system, so it should be no surprise that that your mission is to provide world-class, patient-centered care. But the way you talk about your promises it's clear that those who get that, who really embrace that mission, are driven by it. And so that's why when you talk about cultural fit and being made for this, I mean, it's clearly infused in everything you do and how you talk about it. You may not be doing a heart transplant yourself in the role that you're in. Everybody at Northwell Health is not executing a heart transplant, but whatever you're doing, you're helping that to happen. And you're playing a role, you're making a contribution. And everything that you do and how you express this EVP makes that very clear.
You're 100% right. I mean, Mike and I, we don't have direct patient care, but we know that our jobs affect direct patient care. So from the candidate side and my end, if we don't hire the right staff that meet our values or are made for this, then our care may decrease or the quality of care may decrease. And from Mike's job, if they're not telling the right story and really getting the information out there, the morale may decrease, which will also decrease our quality of care. So while, again, we do not have direct patient care, our jobs directly impact patient care.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mike, I think you were the one that shared the story last week about President Kennedy walking into the Space Center decades ago and asking the janitor what he was doing as he's sweeping up in the middle of the night during his shift. And he said, "I'm getting a man to the moon." I love that story. That is activation of employer value proposition at its best. It's fantastic. So you guys have been on quite the journey. It's hard enough to define a culture across a broad, massive organization. You're onboarding upwards of 250 people every week. So activating a brand and defining a singular culture for that kind of organization is challenging enough, and you did it on the backs of a brand new brand. So if we move to the next slide, there's lots of, once you've gotten to this point, there's lots of channels to be considered in terms of activating your brand, both for internal to employees to uphold the promise that you've made to them, and for them to understand that they're living, they've agreed, it's a two-way street, they've agreed to live your values and they receive something in return. So internal activation is critical for employee engagement and activation. But then obviously infusing your EVP into your recruitment strategy is critical as well. The promise that you make to candidates is critical as well. So how do you approach social media as a platform? It's a big animal. We all spend hours a day online, most of that time on social. So it can't be ignored. It's a very important channel for activating your brand and telling your story. How did you approach social in the revamp of your recruitment marketing strategy, and then from driving employee engagement as well?
So we knew we had to do it right from the candidate side. Internally, we had taken such an extended period of time to build it and really get it right. So we knew activating it externally had to be the same way. Once we came out with the EVP and we launched it internally, we had revamped our entire, or reskinned our entire careers website, so it spoke to the Made for This theme. We reskinned our social sites, everything from Facebook to Twitter to YouTube to Glassdoor to LinkedIn. And with that, we came out with a series of teasers right before the launch that kind of gave hints that something big was coming, some of the key phrasing and wording that came with the EVP. And the day of the official launch externally to the candidates for our EVP, we actually launched and sponsored the promise video that you saw earlier. And the engagement was tremendous on it. Where we've really seen this take off was our initial push out to the public. We found that engagement was higher on social, video watches were higher. We sponsored a, or I should say we wrote a blog, or Elaine Page, our Chief People Innovation Officer, wrote a blog for us introducing the blog, the EVP. And then we sponsored that blog in native on Symphony's smart media platform. And so far to date, it's gotten 22-ish hires, and with that, about 400 or so applications. So people were really responding positively to our brand and our EVP. Now, keeping in mind is what you said earlier, we had just launched a brand new brand maybe a year and a half prior. So for the second time, candidates are now seeing a revamp of Northwell Health's look and feel with the EVP. So we had to really be careful on how we manage that. From a social standpoint, everything we do infuses the Made for This theme into it when we're talking about an employee of ours. For example, every Tuesday we come out with a career progression picture that shows where somebody started in their career to where they are now. And because it's talking about an employee of ours and how they're made for this and how their career has progressed, you'll always see what we call the mark, which is the Made for This lockup, but we call it the mark, on the image. If we're talking about something more general about our careers as a whole, or there's a nursing position, we won't necessarily use that. So we're being really cautious on where we use the mark and how we use the phrase made for this, or are you made for this, to A, ensure we don't overuse it, and B, ensure that we're telling the right story. So again, anything with an employee mention, a career progression story, there are certain blogs that talk about our employees who represent our new values, or represent why they are made for the organization, then we will always have the mark or something about made for this on it.
And then in addition to that, and Jess sort of touched on this as well, internally some of our activations led to building things for external use. So Elaine Page, our Chief People Innovation Officer, did an Instagram takeover where her day was followed on Instagram. She used our values and our language in the promise, and it's important to note that our new refreshed values are the themes that came out of the language from our promise. So we have 5 refreshed values. Also, to continue with the storytelling, there is a storytelling platform that we've deployed internally, and each month or every 2 months, one of our values is highlighted, and we ask internal employees to showcase how those values live in action across our health system. And those stories, with coordination with our marketing department, could be used externally on our career site to show how innovative or how ambitious or how compassionate our employees are. And by the way, those are 3 of our 5 values.
So we've partnered from the candidate engagement side with not only the employee engagement side, but also internal communications. And between all 3 of the groups, we reuse and repopulate certain content that makes sense for each of our channels and our audiences. And as Mike referenced, the platform that we're using to collect these stories will now be pushed out during healthcare recognition days, weeks, months. And we're telling the stories about how our employees are truly ambitious, which is one of our refresh values. And the content will be shared not only on our intranet, on our internal Facebook group, as well as our external candidate Facebook, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, etc.
So much of the work that we do here is really, from the heart, and so we wanted people to emotionally connect to our promise and our values internally, because we knew that, not that there's a secret sauce, but that's as close as we could get to it, that if people could connect to these items emotionally, it's something that they're going to begin to live every day in their life.
And you both talked about unifying the experience of the candidate to employee and about the partnership, all of the communication and collaboration and partnership. I've heard that word several times. That's so critical in bridging the candidate to employee experience. Tell me how, you do all this work to get to the EVP, and then the additional work of activating across so many platforms in so many ways, internally and externally. How do you measure that entire experience to get pulse checks and to know that it's resonating and that it's driving the outcomes that you're looking for?
Sure. So it's certainly important for us to just note that this is the beginning of our journey on this, right? So the larger leadership in our organization ever heard the words of the promise were at a leadership rally we held in March, right?
At Madison Square Garden.
At the theater at Madison Square Garden for our top 5,000 leaders. And so we're only, a few months into our journey, and we've had activation, roughly every month, different types of activations. But as far as for our internal folks, we measure engagement every year, once a year, with an annual engagement survey, plus we have pulse surveys, and we have questions on there that will get to the impact of the employee promise and our values. We're launching our annual survey this January, so we'll have some data around that. And we also hold regular feedback sessions and focus groups to sort of get the pulse of the organization. And myself and my team do our best to get out into the field and talk to people as much as we can, because there's really no better way than to know internally how these things are being received than to actually travel to our sites and ask that question.
However, we don't need to travel to the sites to see how it's doing or even take a survey, to be quite frank. We have an internal Facebook group that can only be accessed by our internals. And I mean, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong here, but when we even pre-launch of the EVP, and before we can even really talk about it, people were using hashtag made for this. People were making their own signage that was certainly not on the proper brand for it, but we could feel the excitement to the point where we also had to kind of police it a little bit to ensure that people were using it correctly. Even to this day, procurement has had to cap some purchases because people were going out to off vendors and creating made for this shirts. And we've had some really interesting stories between the launch of our master brand as well as the EVP. So while we don't have actual numbers in front of us, I think we could wholeheartedly say it's been perceived really well and openly. And the organization itself has acted positively towards the new brand or internal brand.
Well, that's what I love about the collaboration. I've heard you talk about the exercises that you leverage to help people connect to the promise and values. And then you've got the internal channels, the Northwell Life page, the use of storytelling and collecting those stories, not only to recognize and reward living out the right behaviors and upholding the promise, but then that becomes a recruitment tool. You're able to use those employee stories and turn them outwardly to help potential talent, job seekers, potential employees understand what's possible for them if they're made for this. And so it becomes a recruitment tool. I mean, the collaboration here is so good, and I love that you're only partway down the journey. I can't wait to hear how this continues.
It's back with us in a year.
Yeah, it might be interesting to also mention that another activation we've done is the Picture This campaign. So some of the feedback we received when we were building the promise was that we tend to use a lot of stock photos in our internal comms to our employees. And so we held a Picture This campaign where we asked employees to submit photos of themselves in a work setting doing the job they do and highlighting some of our values. And we've gotten great feedback from that. And those photos of our real employees we use in videos and in communications as well, and they can appear on the career site to show what real Northwell employees look like doing the job that they're doing.
It's not on the. I've mentioned this before in some other aspects, but what we do in careers, we don't want to just post that here's a job, go apply for it. Here's the link, here's some JD language that nobody really wants to understand or does understand. We want to show you what our day-to-day is. So by us taking the blog content that we write about how our employees just traveled to Texas to help out with the Hurricane Harvey, and the fact that a handful just came back last Thursday night from Puerto Rico, to, an environmental service worker who had to clean a room because a patient, a child, had to come in. We want to tell these stories. Our job is very compassionate, all of us, again, even if we're not in direct patient care. But we want to tell the stories. We want everyone to know that we truly mean what's written on paper. So by us pushing out that type of content through the careers channels, we're telling it versus just saying it. And that's something that we really try and make happen at Northwell.
So you perfectly begged my next question, and that is around what I like to call sort of the moment of truth. And that's when, in recruiting we talk a lot about we like to compare, and Ryan, you can go to the next slide. We like to compare talent attraction and the courtship of candidates, kind of like the analogy to dating, right? It's a wooing process. There's a courtship that happens, and we're making a promise when we're putting ourselves out there and marketing jobs and displaying our employer value proposition to potential new employees. That's a promise that we're making. The moment of truth is where the experience you've promised becomes the experience you deliver upon. And that happens upon hire and at onboarding. And Jess, you just used several examples where we want to show you that we really do act upon this and deliver upon this, and nobody better than our employees to show you and to display that happens. So how do you bridge the gap and unify the two experiences? Mike, I know you've talked about the level of involvement of your CEO, for example, when new hires come on board. But then how do you also transition that new hire into the reality of their new job and day-to-day employment? Tell me a little bit about that process at Northwell Health.
So it starts with the recruiters first. My team, as well as Mike's team, we've partnered together to create a recruiter handbook. So when the recruiters are conversing with their managers for their intakes about their positions, they're going to ask the right questions so they can gauge the candidates' responses to see if they're made for this. Now, as Mike mentioned, we are 22 hospitals. We are between 62 and 63,000 employees. Every hospital has its own culture as well. And then we acquire hospitals and have to integrate within our culture. So, and practices as well. So we really have to be thoughtful about how we do this. So by creating this book that we're going to be rolling out shortly, it'll help the recruiters ask the right questions and ask the right questions to managers and gauge also the right responses back from their candidates. So we're starting there and then introducing a little bit of made for this throughout the whole process. So it goes from the are you made for this to now after offer made for this, and then through day one of our orientation. Our president and CEO, Michael Dowling, speaks every Monday at beginnings, which is our orientation. It's a unique thing to have a CEO spend an hour and a half or more each Monday with about 200 employees. So starting there is where we really start to introduce the EVP to our new hires.
And then when they move from beginnings, where they have an hour section on our promise and our values, they go to day 2 at their sites, and they go through something we call experience in the box. It's called that because it's a series of 5 exercises that come in a box. And those exercises are geared towards getting them connected emotionally to the promise and the values at Northwell, and telling the story about how the promise was created, how it was by the people, for the people, and a series of exercises using the video you saw to get them connected to that. And then at the end, we ask them to write on a pledge card what they're made for, and we encourage them to carry that around with them or leave it at their desk and check in on it from time to time, on their good days and their most challenging days, to remember why they're here, right? Why they chose this profession and why they chose Northwell Health itself. And it actually ends with a selfie frame that's part of that box, and that ties back into the picture of this campaign, etc. So it generates, the exercises generate more pictures and more promotion for us to use. And then we have other activations as well. We have a 4-hour immersive experience that we are beginning to put our most senior leaders through in the organization, and this is a real deep dive on not only how to live the promise and the values, but also how to think differently when solving for problems using the values as a lens. And then another piece that we'll probably talk about in a moment is we're on a journey to begin to look for ways to measure cultural fit in the organization. We have a somewhat high turnover rate around year 1, a slightly lower one around year 2, and then it drastically drops to about 8% or less after that. And a lot of that, we believe, is due to cultural fit and people not understanding some of the challenges that they'll face when they come into the organization. And that recruitment handbook or recruiter handbook that Jess was just touching on helps the recruiters ask the right questions and tell the story in the appropriate way so that candidates can get a little bit of a realistic job preview and decide whether or not this is the right place for them.
Yeah, when our EVP says that this is not a typical 9 to 5, we mean that. It's not just words on a paper, and we want to set realistic expectations prior to somebody coming in. So when we say that this job is not for everyone, we mean that, and we want people to take those words seriously. So the more that we can display it up front for them to make that decision, we're hoping that it will certainly affect year 1 turnover.
This is where I think of, this is where I start to think of employer value proposition like a Swiss Army knife. There are so many uses for it, not only to, to define your own culture and to drive employee engagement. This is who we are. This is what we promise you. This is what you promise in return. It helps for talent attraction. Obviously, it's a recruiting tool. But when you have a well-defined and developed EVP, you're also able, to your point that you just made, you're able to use it as an assessment tool to decide. This helps so much in development and retention of employees to determine the right people that you have as part of your organization and how to assess for that. And until you have that EVP well-defined and activated, it's difficult to do. And so, Ryan, if we go to the next slide, we talk a lot about the war for talent in terms of attracting new talent, net new talent to the organization, hiring the very best available from the outside. The war for talent, in my mind, is in engaging and keeping the talent you've already worked so hard to hire. That's where companies truly hone their competitive edge. When you have a defined culture and a well-defined EVP, you're able to create a hiring program and approach to assess for that fit. And when you've got right fit talent, keeping them becomes a lot easier. And so how does, you started to touch on this, Mike, and I know that you're only partway into sort of the long-term plan, but how does a hiring program help to assess for cultural fit, to make sure you're hiring the right people so that you can work to keep them?
Sure. So first it starts with the work Jess and her team does to make sure that the applicant pool out there understands as best as possible what it's like to work here and allows them to make the choice, right, initially. So not necessarily shrinking the pool, but getting the right group of people in that pool. So her work connects to that. And then we have right now a 4-phased plan that's going to happen over a number of years. The first phase is, as Jess mentioned, training our recruiters and folks in talent acquisition about how to speak appropriately about the good things at Northwell and some of the challenges here to create a realistic job preview for our candidates coming in. So we want them to know all the amazing things we're doing in research and changing healthcare, but we also want to let them know about what it's going to be like day to day in their job. And that starts with asking the right questions during the intake call, and then also coaching the candidates to ask the appropriate questions to get at culture when they're in the interview with the hiring manager. So asking questions like, what's expected of me in the first 6 months of working here? Or what challenges are you currently facing that not only may I be privy to, but that I could help solve for when I come in? Or what's your approach to developing and growing your direct reports? Those are 3 examples of questions that help the candidate get at some things that might help retain them and continue to engage them if they were to take the job. So it's not only we're interviewing them, but we want them to interview us as well. And then that moves into our second phase, which is creating cultural fit questions for our structured interviews with behavioral anchored rating scales so that all of our hiring managers can ask the same cultural fit questions and rate candidates on that. The third phase is creating a candidate self-assessment so that candidates can get a gauge of how made for this they are when they're coming onto our career site. And then the final phase, which is the one I am most excited about and the one that is the farthest off from now, is either working with a vendor or internally creating our own personality inventory and model that will be linked to cultural fit and engagement within our organization. And the idea would be that that personality inventory would be used as a hurdle in the hiring process. So candidates at some point would take that inventory, and if their personality is way far off from the actual model that's been validated to show fit and engagement and performance and all of those things, they will not make it onto the next hurdle in the selection process.
That's quite an undertaking, but I know in getting to know both of you, I know how important this work is. You talk a lot about your people literally driving your organization. Your Northwell Health saves lives every single day, and if you don't find the right employees to truly live out your culture and your values, lives are quite literally at risk. And so I know how seriously you approach this, finding right fit talent that matches your culture so that you can work to retain them, so that you can do a better job of upholding your promises. So this is quite a journey you've been on. Ryan, we'll go to the next slide. You've mentioned a couple of times, this is all, again, to reinforce for folks listening, this is all brand new work that you are just now in the process of activating. So you're partway down this path, partway on the journey. You've talked about the multi-phased program for assessing for cultural fit. So let's look just a little bit ahead. It's not too far off, actually. What's next in 2018? What are you thinking about? What's important for you to tackle in the next 12 months?
From the candidate side, we're looking how to continue to showcase our culture out to the public, out to the world. We're going to be launching a few new series through some stuff on Facebook with Facebook Live. We're going to be launching a new blog series called This is Healthcare, and we're going to be expanding our current series called An Appointment With, where we interview our leaders in a Q&A style that give real authentic looks into their background and their departments. So we're going to continue from that to push the EVP forward, as well as continue to partner with Mike and his team, as well as internal communications on building different programs and processes to get our candidates really knowledgeable. So at least from the candidate side, and I'm sure Mike's got a few things from the internal side.
Yep. So in addition to the cultural fit project that I just talked about, we're going to continue to roll out the immersive experience that we call Made for Engagement for our senior leaders. Right now we're focusing on the top 250 in our organization, and next year we'll continue to go down to our VPs and above, so that's probably another 400 to 500, and continue to move that down, train facilitators and have it done locally for managers of people. We are also going to be starting to work on an engaging leader project, which we will interview some of the most engaging leaders, the ones with a proven track record for engaging their staff, and create an internal model of what makes an engaging leader, and then create workshops and offshoots from that help people learn about where they stand against that model and how to become a more engaging leader. And those workshops will include things around the promise and the values. So that language and that sort of feel will be woven into that. We also are planning a rally for all of our employees across the health system. It'll be an all-day event where all of our employees will have an opportunity to come to the location and participate in various activations from all of our different branches within the organization, but also continue to connect with our promise and our values as part of that day. And then we've started pilot groups, creating pilot groups in certain areas that are some of our lower engaged groups to begin to solve problems cross-functionally and collaboratively, and we're using our value of truly together, so working in teams to sort of, as sort of the foundation for that process. So breaking down the silos, working together in teams to solve for large-scale organizational problems, and creating some structure around that process. So we have a lot going on.
The cool thing is that when Mike and his team and the employee engagement team and the talent management team or whomever is putting this stuff together, we can use the content from careers. So again, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're showing the world that, hey, we came out with this. We want to engage you. This is what's going on around the organization. A few weeks ago, we just wrapped up our first, or really second, innovation challenge, where we let our employees submit an idea for either marginal improvement or patient care. And they had an opportunity to win up to funding or reward of up to $500,000. So with that, we had a great internal push for it. We had hundreds and hundreds of ideas submitted. The top 8 finalists got to present to a panel of judges in the city. Some of them were celebrity judges. But now that content that's being used, that is showcasing our EVP internally and are made for this, and that they're made for this, and coming up with these truly innovative ideas, which is one of our values. From the candidate side, we could take all that content and push it out. So we're really trying to show everybody what's going on. And my point of that story is more of those types of activities and activations are coming out within the next year as well, where we're going to be involving our employees to really act and live on our employee promise and values.
And that innovation challenge is directly aligned with our value of being truly innovative. So our CEO, when he speaks every Monday, he usually says something like, we have to look for ways to do things better tomorrow than we did today. And he encourages everybody to do that. And he says that if you're standing still, you're moving backwards. Right. So you have to continue to move. He's made it clear we're not slowing down. Speaker. Yeah, but exactly. He wants us to push forward and test our boundaries, right, and challenge. So.
Well, I want to congratulate both of you. This has been no small undertaking. Again, 63,000 employees across dozens of facilities, a brand new, newly launched brand last year. And it hasn't even been mentioned, so I'll give you the kudos. The lift you've seen in employee engagement, I think it was over 20 percentage to 85%. What you've measured for employee engagement since activating the CVP. So look what you've accomplished so far, and you're not even done.
That also has a lot to do with the master brand change as well. We aren't 100% able to measure that yet with the EVP, but we'll certainly say that the talk of an EVP coming and the master brand lift has brought us from the 64th percentile to the 63rd percentile to the 84th percentile, somewhere around there in employee engagement.
And we should both say that we're lucky enough to have a group of really engaged people that work with us every day, and that they were integral to helping make this happen as well. So while we got to be chosen to be the ones on the call, there are many other people who have helped us trudge through the corporate world and the day-to-day to sort of get this stuff pushed out and absorbed within the culture. So
we are truly together here at Northwell Health.
I love it. Well, and I will say it's been an honor being a strategic partner to you along the journey as well. What an exciting story. So Ryan, I'm sure there have been a few questions. This is a really, really great story of real-life application and results, and they're only partway on their journey. What kind of questions do we have from folks that have been able to join us today?
Sure. We've got a handful of questions that I could ask. I'll start at the bottom from way back at the beginning of the presentation. When do you know it's time to update your EVP? And I'm just going to toss that out, and whoever wants to answer that, feel free.
That's a great question. I can at least say I've been at the organization 9 years shortly. I've been through from North Shore LIJ Health System to now Northwell Health. And I could say that we did not have a brand, let alone EVP, back a few years ago. So personally, I felt that when we changed our name, it was a great opportunity for us to introduce an EVP. New master brand, now new internal brand. So for us, that was the right way to do it. Mike, I don't know if you have stuff for
Yeah, I would just add, so we were, I guess, lucky in the sense that we had a blank slate, right?
Yeah.
But I would say my advice would be ask your people, right?
That's a great one.
So ask the employees of the organization. If they're not connected to it, they think it's stale, maybe it was made decades ago and it needs a refresh, ask your people and then engage them in the process of updating that and creating a new one or refreshing the existing one.
If you don't engage your people during that process, it's not going to be authentic. And while we say this was made by our people for our people and we really immerse them in completely, it doesn't have to be that way every time, but just make sure you get their feedback and their input or else it won't feel authentic to your employees.
Yeah, you want to not make it an HR thing. Right?
Or executive leadership thing.
Or executive leadership thing, right. You want it to be your people.
Now we have two questions that we can go to right off of the stem off of that. First, Carmen said, "I love that you have so many employees." I love just as I said that, someone dropped another question in and it pushed it away from me. I love that you have so many employees highlighted in EVP. If you have people who leave the organization that are in the video, do you replace them in the video with another employee, or do you just leave them in? I'm sure you get that question, and I'm sure you went through that process as well.
Yeah. So we would remove them from the video as best we can, but the video lives out there in a world where we can't edit everything, right?
I believe everyone signed something too, saying that if they did leave, that there's a chance that it may stay. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Yeah, most of the folks in our video are award winners in our organization.
Or high potential.
Or high potential, so there's less of a risk for that. But we have had other videos that we've created from one-off activations, and in those cases where people have left, I can attest to that we have removed them from those videos. Because it was easier to do. This promise video you saw is very hard to edit and remove people out of.
There's a second video too that we didn't show you, but those are really the ones, like Mike said, that are really out there. They're shown at our orientation. And if we had to remove every person that may have left the organization, that would be a lot of time and money not well spent.
and if we got to the point where there were so many people in it, we'd look to create a brand new one with new employees. And we already have plans and thoughts to create spin-offs of that original promise video to get more voices heard out there in the organization. That's a great question.
So let's stick with that theme for a moment. We have a couple of questions that came in around getting input from the stakeholders. You've talked about not so much relying on the stakeholders or your senior leadership, but getting the real employees within the organization that actually do the day-to-day. How do you go about getting stakeholders, getting buy-in from stakeholders, and getting their thoughts and opinions weaved into the EVP or into the videos in this, for example, in this question, without it sounding scripted and from senior leadership?
That's a really interesting question. I think we were trying to keep it focused on the employees and their buy-in. Certainly senior leadership had to give their approval, but I know, again, this was not my area, but I do know that they really wanted to keep it as focused on the employees as possible. They had a storyboard of what they wanted it to look like, and they hand chose the right people. So when storyboarding, that part went through senior leadership, and once that was approved, then the right people were chosen for the part.
Yeah, and the people involved in the process, we had help of an external organization to help us build this, but also Elaine Page, our Chief People Innovation Officer, was involved in as many of the sessions as she could be. So she really lent an authentic voice to what this process was all about and explaining it to our employees. And yeah, I mean, I think as long as your senior leadership approves it and they give you the ability to move without them sort of being involved in every step of the way, that's really what helps it be successful.
It was also helpful for us that we had announced the EVP of the launch of it, the look and feel, the video that you saw at the rally that Mike spoke about a little while ago that had 5,000 of our top leaders. So they were introduced to it first. So by the time it came to make these videos and roll out the stuff internally, there was so much excitement around it that we didn't really have to do too much convincing. Everyone really was excited to be a part of this process and build it and grow it and launch it.
Great. Okay. I think we have time for a couple of more questions before we hit the top of the hour. Getting a brand or EVP to carry through from recruitment to operations can be difficult. To get quick buy-in. How is this being accomplished?
Oh boy. I think in various different ways. So from the candidate side, at least, when we come up with ideas and new ways to execute on a plan or content to build, we kind of get our ideas together first, and then we share it with the certain stakeholders that we need to. So we're getting it right up front, so then we kind of have the runway to just launch and go with it. I know internally it's a little bit different. There's a little more back and forth and structure around that, I guess I'll say. But from an external, the positive from my end is that if the content's out there already or you have the idea for the content, we kind of can run with it. Mike, I know you guys have a little more to go through.
So then internally, I mean, I think it's a cross-functional partnership with all of the folks who control all the channels that can be lit up. So marketing, for example, right? Are our internal comms channels being lit up and in sync appropriately with what we're doing in the employee experience group? And then really our experience in the box is our activation that is getting this widespread. We've asked that all our 63,000 employees go through that, if not by the end of this year, by the end of the first quarter next year, so that everybody in the organization is at least exposed to and connected to the promise and the values. And we've created it in a way that it can be delivered in an hour-and-a-half session, or it could be broken up into 5 modules that could be anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes long each, because we understand that we can't necessarily pull our nurses off the shift for an hour-and-a-half at a time, for example. So we've built flexibility in that to be, and we're aware of some of the constraints we have in some of our businesses.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. This is a little more tactical, but I think very relevant, probably to a lot of the people on the call today. Do you have any suggestions for rewriting job descriptions or postings in the new EVP language?
Yeah, so we're actually in the middle of tackling that one right now. Where we started was creating an intro blurb that kind of infused the EVP language as well as some updated culture and putting that right at the top, because we have about 5,000 job descriptions. So for us to individually go through every one of them is going to take us a very long time. Phase 2 for that is for us to not only have that intro kind of culture blurb, but then to build out an intro culture blurb that has to do with the job itself. So it first starts with like Northwell overall EVP, then it's going to start with that if you are an emergency nurse, this is what it's like working in an emergency nurse, as an emergency nurse across the organization in the different facilities, which will then lead into kind of the nuts and bolts of the job descriptions that Comp puts together. Here, Comp owns our job description, so we can't change a lot of it. So where we can fluff it up and add some culture and everything like that to it, that's where we're going. And we're almost ready to enter phase 2 of that within the next month or so, at least in Q1.
And part of the handbook that Jess and I work together on teaches the recruiters how to use some of this language in their communications back and forth with candidates. So, for example, one line in our promise is, spread your wings and grab unbelievable opportunities. Recruiters can use that language when they're conversing back and forth via email with the candidates.
And that's what we show on the career site every day about the unbelievable opportunities. So again, we may take one word or one line or one phrase from the EVP and use it as part of an entire campaign. So we're always infusing it all together, and that's what we did with the job descriptions, at least to get us started.
All right, fantastic. We are at the top of the hour. We had an amazing session today. So Jess, and Mike, thank you very, very much. Of course, thank you to Symphony Talent and Northwell Health for sharing this great information. Again, thank you, everybody. We will see you all next time.